Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, a few days ago I uploaded a video where I unboxed a broken HP Omen machine from eBay. Overall it was a pretty good deal. I paid about £50 for it, but the biggest problem and the thing I couldn't fix was the graphics card. This AMD Radeon RX 580. Now since then, and I need to give you a bit of context for the video, this card has been with a subscriber and it's since returned to me in, let's just say, a slightly better state, but let me explain. So after I uploaded that video, a subscriber by the name of, let's call him Andrew, well because that's his name, got in touch and asked if he could take a look at the card. I said to him sure, and if he wanted to, and he was successful in fixing it of course, or he wasn't, he could keep it anyway. I mean, it was absolutely broken, and if he'd spent a couple of days fixing it, then I felt that it was only right to let him keep it. Now usually when I send things off, of course, and as is standard in the UK, I always write a return address. It's usually just a house number and a postcode so that anything that doesn't get delivered can be returned to me by Royal Mail or whatever courier I decide to use. Now I sent this off to Andrew with the hopes that he could fix it and get himself an RX 580 for cheap or for nothing. I explained to him that it didn't work and it just covered my monitor in green lines. I mean, I could barely get a display from this thing, let alone game. I also had this listed on eBay at the same time, which I totally forgot about, so I had to remove it from there before anyone purchased it while it wasn't in my possession. A few days after I sent this off to Andrew, it came back to me, and there was no note in the box, no explanation, and no email from Andrew saying whether or not he had fixed the card and why he had decided to return it. I tried to email, but I got no response. And what I did notice straight away was that my Radeon sticker had gone missing. The sticker in the centre of the fan here, which I thought was a bit suspicious. Had this individual just asked to take a look at my Radeon card so that he could steal the sticker from the middle of the fan? I highly doubt it, but what I did find odd was that there was no explanation as to why he sent the card back, and he didn't exactly say whether or not he had fixed it or even attempted to. So it was clear that Andrew had used the house number and postcode on the package to return this to me without saying anything, which is fine. But what I was more surprised by was that the card now worked, sort of. I mean, this 580 was fully utilised in a lot of scenarios, as you can see from this CS2 gameplay, but a common theme with it, or the only theme with it, was that it wouldn't boost any higher than 800 megahertz. It seemed to sit around 750 to 770 most of the time. It got to about 60 to 70 degrees 90% of the time as well. But I was just grateful that we weren't being greeted with a monitor full of green lines. This card was certainly usable, and in games like CS2 here, well, it was actually usable in a competitive context as well. I could play and enjoy this game, albeit not very well, with the once broken 580. Now I haven't got any exact on-screen performance stats here because they won't be representative of what a 580 should be capable of in 2024, so I'm just going to talk about performance as and how it is, to be honest. I then tried Elden Ring once again. We were hitting full utilisation from the card, seeing about 700 megahertz. Now interestingly, in GPU-Z, the normal frequencies were reported, so the whole thing was quite odd, to be fair. I mean, this was certainly a playable experience with the 580, don't get me wrong, and there weren't any artifacts on screen or graphical issues when using Windows normally, at least for the first day or so, because we'll get onto that a little later on. I then tried one of my favourites, Fallout 4. This was a bit of a disaster in terms of consistency. Again, we avoided the lowest settings here because normally 580 is more capable than that. But in those more intensive scenarios, we saw some pretty massive dips and drops. I'm talking sudden drops from the mid-60s to the low 30s, which can be quite jarring when you're trying to play and enjoy any game, to be fair. Once again, the clock speed sat at less than 800 megahertz. We actually saw some drops below 30 FPS on some instances too. Again, the temperature seemed pretty stable, if not a little bit high, considering how low the clock speed was. But at least it was a massive 1,000,000% improvement over what we were getting before, but with no explanation as to how or if Andrew attempted to fix the card. This is all a bit odd. Grand Theft Auto 5 up next, the high settings across the board with the detail sliders halfway here. This is pretty easy to run, and even with the 580 running at about 750 megahertz, there are no real issues, not even problems with consistency either. We're seeing over 100 FPS a lot of the time, though it's around about the mid to low 90s where you're going to see that figure sit pretty much most of the time. It was, however, when I got to The Witcher 3 after a few hours of testing that we started to see the temperature rise significantly. I mean, this thing suddenly decided to go from 65 degrees all the way up to 80 in a matter of seconds. As you can see, the clock speed is still around 750 megahertz. There was no throttling beforehand, I don't think, from the temperatures. Though at these temps, yeah, the throttling does begin. We're seeing a bit of a drop to that clock speed overall. This was quite strange. I mean, the temperature just kept going up, and by the time I finished recording this segment, we were sitting at about 90 degrees. It would have kept on going as well. So at this point I left the card for a few hours. In fact, I turned my system off and I actually put my 4060 back in the PC so that I could enjoy Fallout 4 at higher frame rates. When I decided to test the 580 again that evening though, well, things were a little bit different. I mean, it still worked, but there were more problems. The whole of the operating system suddenly became very sluggish and I couldn't really open any program apart from the game I wanted to play. Multitasking had pretty much gone out the window and I could only open one game at a time. I couldn't open it with any other monitoring program, anything like that, because the whole system would crash. I was able to squeeze about 4 FPS from Cyberpunk 2077 with the lowest preset, or settings I should say, with FSR set to balance, but I know that the card should be able to do better than this. At least a fully working 580 should. Starfield at the lowest settings with FSR 3 and 50% scale did worse yet again. It was pretty much like a PowerPoint presentation. Starfield on a 580 at the best of times isn't going to be brilliant, not with some pretty intensive upscaling enabled, but this is definitely worse than it should be. And by the time I'd finished this, turn my PC off again, and then try to play anything else or even just boot up into Windows, the operating system was just freezing. So I don't know what this card had been through, what Andrew had done to try and fix it, but to be honest, it is what it is. I mean, I expected nothing, yet still got something positive in return. I do think he should have kept the card though, but yeah, I'm grateful that we could sort of try this card out in a somewhat working state, but it didn't hang around for long, and now I think it's time to properly send it off to the GPU graveyard. I couldn't notice any signs of soldering or anything like that when I took the card apart either. The thermal paste looked pretty fresh, I have to say, and I think the thermal pads had been moved from the heatsink itself to the PCB, but apart from that, nothing out of the ordinary here. But there we go. The 580 resurrected for about a day, and now non-working once again. But I thought I'd share this story with you and my experience of letting a subscriber attempting to fix my card. I am grateful for the attempt, of course, so thank you, Andrew. You should have kept it, and of course thank you to everyone for watching. I'll see you next time.